We're going to start with adding and subtracting fractions by Professor G. Now, what do we need to do to add fractions? Well, let's take a look at 2. Let's say you have 1/2 plus 1/2. You know, if you put 1/2 of something with another half of something, you end up with 1 whole. And so the answer here is 1. And we know that from our life experience and stuff. Alright? But why is that true? Well, what happens is we add the 1/2 plus the 1/2. The numerators get added together, so you have 1 plus 1 is 2, just like we did when we multiplied. And the denominator stays exactly the same, because the amount of pieces in a whole never changes. And so you end up with 2 in your denominator. The denominator never changes when adding or subtracting. Okay? So 2 over 2 then is just 1. Well, that's all well and good, but what happens when you have something like 3/5 plus 1/3? Well, 3/5 is actually slightly more than a half, so I'm going to make a little extra piece here. And 1/3 is actually slightly less than a half, so I'll make a little missing piece right there. But if you look at those, if you get those and put them together, you're going to get pretty close to a whole. You know, maybe not quite, or maybe a little bit more, but it'll be close to a whole. Well, if you add 3 plus 1 and you get 4, well, now the denominators aren't the same. So you might be tempted to go, well, 5 plus 3 is 8. And you know that 4/8 is 1/2. And you're asking yourself, what happened? Because if you have more than a half and almost a half, you can't add those together and get a half. Remember, we were expecting a whole, or pretty close to it. Okay? Well, we violated this rule. The denominator never changes. Well, the problem is here, the denominator isn't the same. So what we have to have is a least common denominator and what that means is we have to start with the same denominator in all fractions before we add or subtract. Now, this is not true of multiplication and division. Remember, multiplication and division, you don't have to have a least common denominator. But when you add and subtract, a least common denominator is extremely important. So how do I figure out what the least common denominator is for 3 over 5 plus 1 over 3? And remember, we're supposed to get something that's close to 1. Well, it turns out that you can always find a common denominator if you multiply the denominators, and I'm going to do shorthand because it's getting kind of long. If you multiply the denominators together. So here, the denominators are 5 and 3, and so I'm going to multiply the 5 by the 3, and I'm going to multiply the 3 by the 5. Now, this would make, if I left it like this would make a different sort of fraction, right? Because what I would have is I would end up with 3 over 15 and 1 over 15, and I've actually changed the size of the fraction. So I can't do anything to the bottom without doing it to the top. So what I'm going to do is I have to multiply on the top also by 3. And over here, because I multiplied by 5 on the bottom, I have to multiply by 5 on the top. Why is that? Because 3 over 3 is 1, and 1 times 3/5 is still 3/5. And 5 over 5 is just 1, and so 1 times 1/3 is still 1/3. So I haven't changed the value of the fraction when I multiply by the same number on the top and the bottom. And now you see I get exactly the same denominator. Now I have same denominators, a least common denominator, and my numerator is now 3 times 3 is 9, and 1 times 5 is 5. And so my final answer is 14/15, which is approximately 1, which is what I expected. And so that makes me very happy. Okay? So you can always find a common denominator if you multiply the denominators together. Now, what about other times? And this is a great question, right? What about some other things that we might try? For instance, what if you have 1/6 plus 2/3 that you're trying to add together? Now, certainly it will work to multiply the 6 and the 3 together. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply by 3 and multiply by 3. I'm going to multiply by 6 and multiply by 6. And I'm going to end up with 3 over 18 plus 12 over 18. And I can go ahead and add those two fractions together. 3 plus 12 is 15. And remember, I'm keeping the denominator the same, and so the 18 goes down here. But I look at that and I go, well, 15 over 18 reduces, right? 3 goes into both of those. 3 goes into 15 5 times, and 3 goes into 18 6 times. And so reduced, it becomes 5/6. So the only downside of just multiplying the denominators together is you may have to reduce at the end, because you didn't use the least common denominator, you just used a common denominator. So how do I find the least common denominator then? Well, it turns out that it has to do with common factors. And so you need to use something called prime factorization to help you out. And so we're going to go back to our problem right up above, 1/6 plus 2/3. And I look, and 6 has the common factors of 2 and 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Well, 3 is prime. It's only made up of a 3. So if you look, and you probably already noticed this as I was starting to add, the 3 is common to both, And so really all I have to do to get a common denominator is multiply this guy by 2. And why is it by 2? Because that's the only factor that's missing from here over here. And now you'll see that I have a 3 and a 2 and a 3 and a 2. And so life is good. Alright? And so now you have the 1/6 that stays the same. And now you have 2 times 2 is 4. And 3 times 2 is 6. And you have the common denominator that you wanted. And so now we add our numerators to get 5. And we keep our denominator the same to get 6. And that's the answer we had above after we reduced. So prime factorization is one method of finding the least common denominator. And it's kind of helpful. You know, if you were looking at something like 5/12 plus 7/18, and you were trying to add those two fractions together, then the prime factorization of 12 is going to be 4 times 3, and 4 breaks down into 2 times 2 times 3. So there's its prime factorization. And for 18, you're going to have 2 times 9, and bring down the 2, and 3 times 3, right? So what's in common? Well, the 2 is in common in both, and the 3 is in common in both. So the only thing that's missing is the 2 over here, so I need to multiply by 2 over here, and the 3 over here, so I just need to multiply by 3 over here. And now you'll notice that 3 times 12 is 36, and 2 times 18 is also 36. Now don't forget, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Otherwise you change the value of the fraction and you're solving a completely different problem, and that's no good. And so 5 times 3 is 15, and 7 times 2 is 14, and when you add those together you get 29 over 36.